Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling something that, well, it touches every part of your life, really, from the dinner table right through to the boardroom. Navigating those tough conversations, we're talking about stepping up, speaking truth maybe when it's hard, and holding people and holding yourself accountable when expectations are missed, or, let's be honest, sometimes completely blown.
Absolutely. And our source material today, it gives us a pretty powerful framework for doing exactly that. We're diving deep into a comprehensive book on crucial confrontations. We're going to pull out the core insights and hopefully some really practical tools.
Yeah, think of this as your shortcut, maybe. Getting skilled at turning those potential conflicts into, well, productive resolutions. Our mission is to extract the absolute must-know nuggets from these pages for you.
Because the stakes for not having these conversations, they're incredibly high. The cost of avoidance is laid out pretty starkly in the sources.
Yeah, it starts with some truly tragic examples, actually. The book brings up the NASA disasters, the Challenger explosion, and then years later, Columbia. In both cases, people knew. They knew there were serious safety concerns. Engineers saw issues with the O-rings. Others had worries about foam striking the wing. But fear, the hierarchy, the culture, it prevented them from speaking up effectively. Yeah. And the consequences were just catastrophic.
And it wasn't really a technical failure, not in the sense of not knowing the problem existed.
Right.
It was a human failure.
Yeah.
A communication breakdown.
Right.
The barrier wasn't a lack of data. It was like the inability to voice those concerns in a way that actually penetrated the system, and led to action. The sources really pinpoint this lack of communication skill. That was crucial.
And you see this play out in less dramatic but still really critical everyday scenarios, too. The book highlights healthcare settings. Nurses feeling uncomfortable confronting colleagues about, say, inconsistent hand washing.
Yeah, that's a big one.
And we're talking about millions of hospital infections annually that could potentially be avoided. They tried everything, adding more sinks, posters.
Right, the structural stuff.
Exactly. But the core issue wasn't the plumbing or the signs. It was the lack of skill, that confidence maybe, and having that difficult conversation about a simple but vital expectation.
Yes, and that's often the case, isn't it? The real problem isn't structural or technical, but it's social, interpersonal. Adding more sinks doesn't change the fact that you might have to confront a peer who isn't following protocol.
It even hits you where you live, literally. There's this striking study mentioned in the sources. Apparently, it could predict whether couples would stay married with, 94% accuracy.
Wow, 94%.
Yeah, based only on how they handled their differences in just 15 minutes of conversation.
15 minutes, that's incredible.
So avoid those crucial conversations in a relationship. The consequence can literally be divorce. I mean, that's a huge claim, but it just underscores the power of these moments, right?
It really does.
Yeah.
And it extends right into the workplace in every direction. The sources cite studies suggesting productivity often runs at half of what it could be.
Yeah.
Partly due to these unaddressed issues.
Yeah.
And they don't shy away from some pretty extreme examples like Leo physically assaulting an employee.
Whoa.
Yeah. Where abusive behavior is tolerated simply because people are too afraid to confront it.
Yeah.
Apparently there's no social skills detector when hiring,
Which leads to a really profound insight right off the bat, doesn't it? The real opinion leaders, the people who actually drive results and shape cultures, they aren't necessarily the most technically brilliant or, the most charismatic.
No.
They're the ones who know how to hold people accountable effectively.
Okay, so let's unpack that. When you decide, okay, I need to confront this issue, one of the absolute biggest mistakes people make is addressing the wrong problem.
Right.
They go after whatever seems easy or convenient or maybe just immediately obvious instead of figuring out the core issue that's actually causing the behavior.
The book uses a great example, a school principal dealing with two second-grade girls. One uses a racial slur, the other hits back with an insult.
Okay.
The principal focuses the discipline on the specific words, use the slur and the insult. But then later, a parent challenges the discipline. And the conversation quickly reveals, deeper patterns of interaction, historical issues between the girls, how conflicts are usually handled.
So the initial focus.
Yeah, the initial focus on just the immediate incident completely missed the boat.
Exactly. Just focusing on the content of that single event meant the principal wasn't dealing with the underlying patterns or the damage to the relationship between the girls. The sources introduce a really simple but powerful tool to avoid the sort of Groundhog Day loop, where the same problems keep popping up because you only dealt with the symptom.
And that tool is the CPR acronym, resuscitating the relationship.
Yeah. Good way to think about it. Okay, so C is for content. This is the single event, the here and now. It's about what happened right at that moment. The example they give is pretty specific. You drank too much at the luncheon, became inebriated, started talking too loud. It's describing the observable behavior in one instance.
Got it. Like a single snapshot.
Exactly. Then P is for pattern. This is when the issue isn't just a one-off, it's starting to repeat itself. Influential people, the source says, they notice this trend and they address the pattern itself, the example they provide. This is starting to happen a lot in your conversations with him or her.
Yeah.
It's about the frequency, the recurrence, not just the latest incident.
Okay, so content is one point, pattern is connecting the dots over time, and then the big one.
R is for relationship. This is about how the pattern is affecting us. You know, your working relationship, your friendship, your marriage. It often involves a loss of trust or respect, or it's putting a significant strain on how you actually interact. The examples from the source, they really hit hard here. This is starting to put a strain on how we work together, or I feel like I have to nag you to get things done, or even I can't trust you to keep the agreements you make.
Wow, okay. That frame changes everything, doesn't it? So if my colleague is repeatedly late, the real problem isn't just them being late today. That's content.
Right.
It's that I can't rely on them for scheduled meetings. That's the pattern, which erodes my trust and impacts our collaboration. That's the relationship. Suddenly I'm dealing with something much deeper than just tardiness.
Precisely. And the sources really emphasize this. Confronting only the content when you're actually facing a pattern or a relationship issue is why problems don't get solved. They just keep coming back.
Yeah.
Think about that salesperson who keeps giving unauthorized discounts after being told not to. Just talking about that specific discount, the content dying, it ignores the fact that they broke a clear agreement about pricing guidelines, which is fundamentally a trust problem, a relationship issue.
So CPR is your diagnostic tool, forces you to get clear on the actual problem you need to address before you even start the conversation.
And speaking of initiation, before you even open your mouth, the sources insist you have to work on yourself first. This is the absolutely crucial step they call master my stories. It dives into how the stories we tell ourselves about why others are behaving poorly, how those stories justify our own negative reactions and actions.
The instant mental movie where we cast the other person as the villain happens so fast.
Exactly. And here's where it gets really interesting. A core nugget from the book. You cannot solve a problem with a villain. You can only solve a problem with a human being. The stories we invent, they strip away their humanity in our minds. We make them one-dimensional.
So the critical shift is from judging them as a villain to what exactly?
Well, the book suggests adopting a situational view instead of just a dispositional one.
Okay.
So instead of assuming someone is acting badly because they are a bad person, that's the disposition. You consciously ask yourself things like, what other factors or influences might be acting on this person? Or what's causing them to do this? And crucially, since this person is presumably rational, but seems to be acting irrationally or irresponsibly, what am I missing about their situation, their perspective?
That completely flips the script, doesn't it? Instead of being an angry judge, you become like a curious detective.
Precisely. Curiosity is the antidote to contempt or anger, really. It opens you up to gathering more data instead of just shutting down into judgment.
And then the sources hit you with the tough part, turning those eyeballs inward. You might be a significant part of the problem yourself.
Oof. Yes. That's often the blind spot, isn't it? Especially if you're in a position of authority. Others might be resisting or shutting down or failing to deliver because of your style, your reactions, the way you manage. And you might not even realize it.
Yeah.
The essential, difficult question to ask yourself is, what, if anything, am I pretending not to notice about my role in this social formula, about my contribution to the problem?
So master my stories means questioning both the negative narrative you have about the other person and honestly examining your own potential contribution. Get your head straight before you ever confront.
Absolutely. Your internal state dramatically impacts the external outcome. It really does.
Okay, so you've used CPR to define the right problem, and you've mastered your stories to ensure you're coming from a place of curiosity and honesty. Now it's time to actually initiate the conversation. The sources give us some crystal clear advice on what you should absolutely not do when you open your mouth.
Yeah, this section is gold because so many common approaches just backfire immediately. First up, don't play games. This covers dishonest or manipulative tactics, like don't sandwich bad news between two positives. It confuses people, dilutes the message.
Right, like, I love your enthusiasm, but you miss the deadline and the project is failing, but keep that enthusiasm. It feels so fake.
Exactly, and the positive feels totally insincere. Another game is entrapment, which is just cruel, really. You lure someone into denying something you know is true just so you can nail them for lying, like setting a trap for a kid, stole cookies.
Oh, that just destroys trust instantly.
It does, and so does charades or mind reading. The Carmen example the book uses is perfect. A boss calls an employee in and just says, "Why do you think I called you in?" Making them guess the offense.
Ugh, that's awful, infantilizing.
And deeply frustrating. Just be direct. State the problem clearly.
So no games. What else to avoid?
Avoid public shaming. This includes using inappropriate humor, masked aggression like a sarcastic joke during a group meeting about someone's performance. The sources say some people perfect this over years, but it's just cruel.
Or the classic group attack. Chastising the entire team for one person's mistake.
Which fails on multiple levels, doesn't it? It misses the actual target of the problem, it alienates everyone who wasn't the problem, and it doesn't allow for specific coaching. Problem solving is almost always best done privately, one-on-one.
The sources also strongly warn against being vague.
Yes. The example of Bruno, a manager who intentionally used ambiguity, muttering things like shape up or fix that, without specifying what is a way to wield power and create anxiety.
Wow.
Lack of clarity is a huge barrier to solving problems. People need specific details to understand what actually needs to change.
Don't tell them improve your attitude. Tell them which specific behaviors you observed that led you to conclude their attitude needs improvement. Be concrete.
Exactly. And finally, avoid sharing harsh stories or conclusions first. Don't start with your judgment like you show no confidence. Start with the facts, what you saw and heard, and then describe the result or impact of that behavior.
Okay.
Leading with a conclusion just puts people on the defensive immediately, and it's often too broad or inaccurate to be helpful anyway. Describe the gap. Expected behavior versus observed behavior. Use concrete details.
Okay. Avoid games, public shaming, vagueness, and leading with judgments. Solid rules for initiation. Now, what happens when the confrontation is about someone not doing what they agreed to do, and it seems like a choice? How do you make that conversation motivating?
Right. This is key. We often fall into the trap of thinking motivation requires some big charismatic performance, like Denzel Washington inspiring the radio man in Crimson Tide. The sources debunk that myth pretty effectively. Motivation isn't really about charisma. It comes from the person's anticipation of consequences, the overall bundle of good and bad outcomes they foresee from their behavior. Your job is to help make the right consequences clear and tangible.
How do you do that without just resorting to threats?
Well, you discuss the natural consequences, what will naturally happen if this behavior continues.
Yeah.
What's the inevitable result in the system or the workflow or the relationship? And you introduce hidden victims. Help them see the unintended impact of their actions on others. They might not be thinking about colleagues, customers, stakeholders, even their own family, if the behavior has external repercussions.
Making the impact visible to them, bringing it out of the shadows.
Right. And consistency here is absolutely paramount. You lose credibility and impact if you play favorites, or if you use confrontation as a tool for personal vendettas, or if you back down the moment the other person shows resistance or discomfort.
Yeah.
You have to stick to the process and the agreed-upon consequences.
The sources are very clear about the heavy cost of using force or just raw power to motivate.
So it's incredibly destructive. Using force or authority, it kills relationships. It turns a potential partnership into a police state where you're just a feared enforcer. It fundamentally motivates resistance. People resent being compelled, they lose their sense of agency, and they might even resist out of principle or intentionally underperform just to push back.
Right. Malicious compliance.
Exactly. And it doesn't last. The Kurt Lewin study cited shows results under that kind of authoritarian leadership drop dramatically the moment that authority figure leaves the room. Fear-based compliance just vanishes when the fear is removed.
So don't aim to be feared, aim to be respected for addressing issues fairly and effectively.
Exactly. And be cautious with extrinsic rewards too, like bonuses or special perks. The sources warn that offering external rewards for tasks that should be intrinsically motivating can actually extinguish that inner drive.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, like paying kids to read, they might stop reading for fun and only read when there's a payout. It can backfire.
And what if you lack formal authority? Can you still address a motivation problem?
Yes. The sources suggest you can avoid becoming like a conspirator in the problem by at least being candid about your coping strategy. If others won't change and you can't impose consequences, you don't have to enable the problem through silence. You can clearly state how you will adapt to this situation, maybe just protecting yourself or your work, without trying to secretly fix their behavior for them.
Okay, so if it's a motivation issue, focus on making consequences clear, connecting actions to impact, being consistent, and avoiding force or misusing rewards.
But what if the person wants to do the right thing, but for some reason they just can't?
Then it's not a motivation problem, it's an ability problem.
Correct. And if the root cause is a lack of ability, your job isn't to motivate harder, it's to make it easy for them to succeed.
How do you diagnose an ability issue accurately, though? It seems easy to mistake can't for won't.
That's where the master my stories part comes back in. Again, check your assumptions. And then don't assume you know the solution. Jointly explore the root causes and barriers with the other person. The person closest to the problem is often acutely aware of obstacles you can't even see. Don't just rush in with your fix.
But sometimes people hide their lack of ability, right? Like being afraid to admit they don't know how to do something.
Yes, the sources definitely acknowledge that.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes your role is to advise, to help make those invisible barriers visible. The example of someone struggling with equipment, not because they're lazy, but because they can't read the complex instruction manual. Maybe a form of illiteracy they're hiding that's powerful. You have to uncover that barrier.
And the problem might not be internal to the person at all. It could be their environment.
Absolutely. Critical point. The sources emphasize looking at environmental barriers, physical issues, maybe conflicting goals, unclear roles, restrictive rules, lack of information, poor technology. If the process requires 7 signatures, the problem isn't usually the person's motivation. It's a policy barrier.
Right.
And rules made internally can be unmade internally.
That makes so much sense. Human nature steers us towards ease, doesn't it? If something is genuinely difficult or impossible due to ability or environmental roadblocks, people will struggle or avoid it regardless of how motivated they are.
So, with an ability problem, your focus shifts entirely to removing those roadblocks, making the impossible possible, and maybe making the unnecessarily difficult less painful.
Okay, so we've covered diagnosing, preparing, initiating what not to do, making it motivating, and making it easy. But what happens in the middle of the conversation itself? It rarely goes perfectly according to script, does it?
Oh, it almost never does. The sources stress the need to be both focused on your core issue and flexible enough to handle new problems that pop up during the confrontation. You can't get completely sidetracked by every little thing, but you must address a new, more significant issue if it emerges.
So you might need to pause your original topic, kind of step out to address the new issue, and then maybe return, like leaving a kind of bookmark.
Exactly. The book helpfully categorizes these emergent problems into 4 types and suggests how to handle each. The first is a loss of safety. If the other person feels attacked, misunderstood, or defensive, they say something like, "Are you saying I'm incompetent?" Their ability to hear you just shuts down.
You have to rebuild that safety first.
Yes.
Before anything else.
Yes. You step out of the original discussion and focus entirely on restoring safety. You might clarify your shared purpose. My goal here is just to figure out.
Right.
Or use contrasting statements. Look, I do not mean to imply you're incompetent. What I'm trying to discuss is. Or maybe offer a genuine apology if your delivery caused offense. Only then can you attempt to return to the original issue. Safety first.
Okay. What about a loss of trust emerging during the conversation?
Yeah, this happens when someone violates an agreement or a process during the confrontation itself. The book uses the example of addressing someone missing a required training, and they say they had to because, Omar and payroll needed me at headquarters. The immediate problem isn't training versus payroll. That's content. The deeper problem is they made a unilateral decision to violate a clear expectation without communicating it to you. That's a relationship issue. It's about trust and process.
They broke the process or the agreement of how you handle things together.
Yes. And the critical sentence for accountability here, combining flexibility with focus, is something like, "Okay, I understand Omar needed you, but if something like that comes up in the future, please let me know as soon as you can so we can figure out how to handle it together." You address the violation of the process or agreement first. The fact they didn't inform you or involve you in the decision before trying to return to the original issue of missing the training. You hold them accountable to the method of collaboration.
Got it. The third type is simply a completely different issue that pops up and is actually more serious than your original topic.
Right. If something significantly more important surfaces, you put the original conversation on hold and address that critical new issue immediately. Triage, basically.
And the fourth is handling explosive emotions: anger, tears, frustration.
Yeah, if these take over, you need to step out of the content entirely. This is where connecting back to Master My Stories and the broader path to action framework is really key. Remember, their strong emotions aren't random. They stem from the story they're telling themselves about what's happening. Your job is to help them feel safe enough to explore that story.
Don't get defensive yourself or mirror their emotion, right?
Absolutely not. Don't try to one-up their anger by sharing your own frustrations or how much worse you have it. The sources suggest using techniques like mirroring their emotion or energy level gently. You know, the way you said that makes me wonder if you're feeling frustrated. You seem a bit heated. Or paraphrasing what you hear them say. So if I understand correctly, you're feeling completely overwhelmed by this new deadline, is that right? These signals show you're listening, you're trying to understand, and they create space for them to share the story behind the emotion.
So managing the conversation requires readiness to pivot, address these emergent issues based on their type, always aiming to restore safety or clarify the process before hopefully returning to your original topic.
Exactly. And the sources also touch briefly on some specific, persistent, challenging scenarios that come up a lot.
Like dealing with someone who just shuts down and refuses to talk, the married to a mime scenario mentioned in the book. That sounds tough.
Yeah, it's a deeply damaging pattern in relationships where one person pursues resolution and the other just escapes or stonewalls. That pattern itself needs to be confronted as the core problem, the relationship issue.
And navigating gossip or secondhand information.
Crucially, the sources warn against adopting someone else's story. You absolutely need to master your own story by gathering firsthand information, observing the problem yourself if possible, before confronting anyone based on hearsay. Don't carry water for someone else's drama.
Changing a whole culture. That sounds incredibly daunting.
It is, and the book makes it clear it takes way more than posters or slogans. Culture change happens one crucial confrontation at a time. Consistent accountability for shared expectations, modeled from the top down, ideally, is absolutely key.
And a classic scenario of the overloaded workload, where speaking up feels like you're not being a team player.
Yeah, that conversation has to begin by establishing mutual purpose. Frame your concerns not as complaining, but as wanting to find the most effective way for you to contribute to the shared goals of the team or company. It's about optimizing everyone's contribution, not shirking responsibility.
Beyond just the confrontations themselves, the sources really emphasize the importance of building fuller relationships overall.
This is absolutely critical context. Crucial conversations land so much better, or sometimes even unnecessary, in the context of a relationship built on mutual respect and understanding. Take time for casual interactions. Get to know people beyond just the task at hand. The example of Donald Peterson, former Ford chairman, who apparently wrote personal handwritten notes to employees regularly. Yeah, or just taking a teenager out to lunch with no agenda. These things build the relationship bank account, you know? You don't want to be seen only as the person who shows up when there's a problem.
And praise plays a huge role in that positive context.
Massive. The sources note that lack of recognition is often the #1 complaint employees have. They offer some counterintuitive advice here. Praise more than you think you should, maybe even double it. Praise individuals privately but with care, not performatively, and praise groups publicly. Add spontaneity with simple notes or quick, genuine comments alongside any structured recognition programs. Praise isn't just nice. It's fundamental to building trust, respect, and creating a climate where accountability conversations are possible and even productive.
So build the positive context continuously. Don't just draw from the bank account. Make deposits.
Right. Well put.
All right, we've covered a tremendous amount of ground from these sources, pulling out some incredibly practical, sometimes counterintuitive insights for navigating these difficult moments. Let's do a quick recap of the core skills we talked about.
Okay. First, choose what and if. Get crystal clear on the real problem, content, pattern, or relationship. Use that CPR lens. And weigh the costs. Is the risk of having the conversation greater than the risk of not having it? Often the silent cost is far, far higher.
Second, master my stories. Challenge your automatic negative judgments, assume positive intent or at least rationality, and look for those situational factors. And critically, look inward. What's my role in this problem?
Third, make it motivating. If it's a won't problem, make the natural consequences and the impact on those hidden victims clear and compelling. And be consistent.
Fourth, make it easy. If it's a can't problem, collaborate to identify and remove those ability or environmental barriers. Be a problem solver with them.
And finally, Follow-up. Use checkups and checkbacks after the conversation. Don't adopt that busy, hands-off approach, which often reads as apathy or a lack of real commitment. And never choose perceived niceness over accountability. Not following up is actually unkind because it allows the problem to fester and maybe allows the person to fail again.
The powerful takeaway from these sources, I think, is that the ability to handle crucial confrontations effectively isn't some innate talent you're born with. It's a skill. It's learnable.
Yeah, absolutely. You probably already possess some of these skills on your best days when things go well. What this material provides is a systematic approach, a set of tools, and a kind of clear map to help you apply these skills more consistently and effectively, even in the most challenging moments.
And remember, those first steps, choosing what and if, mastering your stories, they all happen safely inside your own head. You can dramatically increase your chance of success before you even say a single word.
Given the profound impact these conversations have on literally everything, your closest personal connections, your effectiveness at work, even safety in large organizations, here's maybe a final thought for you to consider. What small step could you take today, maybe even right after listening, to practice just one of these skills in a situation you've perhaps been avoiding?